Let's talk about devolution. Because in the UK, there's a lot of confusion about what it actually means, especially when it comes to the economy. You'll often hear things like, why doesn't the Scottish Government just invest more? Why can't Scotland fix public services? Why are budgets so tight? To understand the answers, we need to understand one key idea. Not all governments are created equal. So what does devolution mean? In Scotland's case, it simply means that some powers are transferred from the UK Parliament in London to the Scottish Parliament in Edinburgh. So yes, Scotland has its own government of a sort, but its powers are limited and it only has control over certain governmental areas. This includes things like health, education, transport, the legal system, and some taxation. But most areas are reserved to London. Crucially, this includes monetary and economic policy, financial regulation, but by far the most important area is currency. And that changes everything. There are two fundamentally different types of governments: currency issuers and currency users. The UK government at Westminster is a currency issuer. It issues the pound sterling. It spends by creating money, although you're not often told that. It cannot run out of pounds in the same way you or I can. The Scottish Government is a currency user, just like a household, just like a business, just like a local council. It has to get money before it can spend it. This distinction is not just technical, it's everything. When Westminster spends, it doesn't need to find money first. It creates new money through spending. But this spending is constrained by inflation and available resources. Along with that, it determines monetary policy. It varies interest rates. It regulates the financial system. And if you've been paying attention over the past 40 years, this has all been geared to the City of London. And underlying all that is economic ideology, which has resulted in mass privatisation and low taxation of key resources like oil and gas, electricity, etc., and a move away from ideas like council housing. That reverberates out and is reflected in its budget allocation to devolved areas. When the Scottish Government spends, it's constrained by a fixed budget, its annual block grant from London. It cannot create new money. It must balance competing priorities tightly, and any additional money to be allocated in one area has to come from another, or by raising additional taxation in areas it has the power to do so, for example, income tax. So this is why it's not so easy to say, why doesn't Scotland just spend more on public services? But here's where things get really confusing. At the UK level, politicians and policymakers act like Westminster is a currency user, and that there's little difference between the devolved and national economy, and that the devolved governments in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland have all the powers they need to create a prosperous economy. But this simply isn't the case. Think about it another way. All the pounds we pay in tax have to have been spent into existence first. That monopoly power lies with the British government in London. So this government as a household narrative is wrong for Westminster, but it's much closer to reality for Holyrood. This creates a strange political dynamic. Scottish voters might expect the Scottish Government to economically intervene in the same way that central government can, for example, in saving key infrastructure assets from closure. Whilst this might be possible, it's an entirely different proposition for a devolved government operating under local authority-style financial constraints. So you get the frustration. People blame Scottish Government mismanagement, when often the deeper issue is structural economic limits, baked into devolution itself. Now, this isn't an attempt to absolve devolved governments of any responsibility. They should be held to account for mismanagement of their devolved areas, and any resources they do have governance over. But delivering economic growth, for example, in devolved areas, is largely dependent on the will of central government. A national economy in decline means a devolved economy in decline. Let's simplify this. At the UK level, the real question should be, do we have the workers? Do we have the materials? Do we have the energy and infrastructure? And more importantly, do we own it? At the Scottish level, the question is often, is there money left in the budget? Are we using the money in that budget wisely? Will varying taxation when the UK economy is stagnating make any difference? That's a fundamentally different game. So when we talk about devolution, we're not just talking about politics. We're talking about economic power. And the key divide is this. Westminster controls the currency. Scotland does not. Which means Westminster can choose to spend more within real limits. But Scotland must prioritise within constraints it doesn't control. If you don't understand this difference, nothing in UK politics quite makes sense. Not public spending debates, not austerity, not the limits of devolved governments. Because once you see it, it becomes obvious. Devolution gives responsibility, without full economic power. And until that changes, devolved governments will always be operating with one hand tied behind their backs. Not all governments are financially equal, and that shapes everything.
1,000 voices